If a NASA physicist told you that reality was fundamentally comprised of information and that we live in some kind of a cosmic virtual reality, would you believe him? Now, Tom Campbell doesn't want you to take his word for it. He's all about open-minded skepticism. He's all about seeing the world for yourself and experiencing it through your own processes, your own experience. And in having interviewed him, which is what you guys are about to see, we got to go over so many fascinating topics ranging from the nature of reality, quantum physics, what are the implications of quantum physics, double slit experiment, data. Is reality fundamentally comprised of data? In which case, is a physical world really physical, or is it comprised of something deeper? So all of these things I was able to ask him in the interview, and it turned out to be incredibly fascinating and interesting. And in merging that, so many different things come out, because it's not just about, what is the nature of reality, what is reality comprised of, how does it all work? The way I see it is that when you understand how the universe works, how the world functions and operates, you can then work on how the universe works for yourself, how you operate, how the dynamics of life and fears and overcoming challenges can come back to affect you. So all these things kind of got wrapped up in it. It's a very long and extensive and deep conversation, which I think you guys are going to absolutely love. So please leave your comments below, like, share it on Facebook with all your friends if you'd like to, and take care, guys. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everybody. Today I have a very special treat for you guys. I am joined by Tom Campbell. He's the author of My Big Theory of Everything, which basically goes pretty deeply and intensely into a variety of ideas, some of which I've covered on this channel before. Things ranging from whatever you want to call it, the digital physics or virtual reality theory. Basically the idea that maybe the world is not what we've been told it is, and that there may be a deeper understanding that we can achieve, not just through woo-woo, spiritual, new age intuitions, but maybe even through scientific empiricism. And I think to a certain degree that is definitely what Tom Campbell provides. So how you doing today, Tom?
Doing great, Chris.
Great. Well, Tom, I mean, if you could, I guess we could start with, could you maybe inform my viewers about what exactly is your general theory? What are you positing in your book? What exactly are you trying to get at there?
Yeah, sort of like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire in 25 words or less. Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I went to college, got a bachelor's degree in physics and math. I had a double major. Went on to graduate school, got a master's degree in physics. Went from there to a different graduate school for the PhD program. And I passed the qualifiers, did all the work, started on my specialty research, which was in nuclear, low-energy nuclear physics.
And you've done some work with NASA?
With NASA, yeah. I worked with NASA. I worked with Missile Defense System. I've worked with NASA, and I've always worked as an applied physicist. My first job was with Army Technical Intelligence. There is a such thing as, we talk about religious belief and personal belief and cultural beliefs, but there's also scientific beliefs. There's some fundamental things that the scientists believe, and these beliefs aren't that they sit in school, in science school, and somebody says, now, here are the things you need to believe. They come with it. They come with the culture that's science. And one of those beliefs is physical reality is all the reality there is. If we look at science has progressed. We see that for every big paradigm shift that comes along, the old science becomes a subset of the new, bigger picture science. So back when the world was flat, we found out that it was round, and the flat Earth becomes a subset. It's a very good approximation for short distances, right? All your surveying is done that way. It's all done on a flat Earth model. You don't get into surveying with the curvature of the Earth until you're doing global surveying and something like that. But a guy comes out to lay out your house, and he says you have an acre. That's a flat acre on a flat plane. And if you happen to be on a slope, well, you actually own more land than because, you know, you got more land there on the hypotenuse of that slope. So the flat Earth is a good model, and it becomes an approximation inside a bigger picture. And then we had Newtonian mechanics, right? And quantum mechanics. Well, when we get to quantum mechanics becomes an approximation. All right, you know, because velocities aren't anywhere near the speed of light, and, you know, we don't have such big distance, you know, we're kind of on a smaller scale, then Newtonian physics is pretty much right. So it's a good approximation where you don't have small distance, don't have speeds. But we know quantum mechanics actually is the big picture. Well, now, with the step up in my big toe, the physical reality becomes a subset. All of those things that we call objective in the world are those things that have small uncertainty associated with them. Okay, if they have a real small uncertainty associated with them, we call them objective. And all those things that have a larger uncertainty associated with them are personal, we call those subjective. So here we have the physicists claiming that the reality, the only reality that is this physical reality. There can't be anything else. So they right away have a logical problem, because if this is the superset, well, where did the superset come from? If everything has a cause, then what was the cause of this set that's everything there is? Well, it can't have a cause, right? There can be no cause for the Big Bang, because the physical reality is everything there is, and before the Big Bang there was no physical reality, but there was this little ball of tight energy, and where'd that come from?
Don't ask that question.
Yeah, where'd that come from? Well, it's impossible. So when you believe that a physical reality is all there is, you also have to believe that this physical reality just popped out of nothing. That's called a mystical belief.
Yes.
So your physical belief actually has to be based on a mystical belief. I'll take that, scientists. Your belief is really at the root no more different than the religious belief that you laugh at. It's based on a mystical assumption. Our reality popped out of nothing, because before the Big Bang there was no universe to create the Big Bang. So obviously that tight little ball of stuff didn't come from us, because we didn't exist yet. It had to have some other cause someplace outside of our reality. First, let me say that this theory you're talking about that I wrote is in the form of a trilogy of 3 books and runs about a little short of 900 pages, and that there are over 200 videos on my YouTube channel, which you can get to by just putting my name, Thomas Campbell, out there, or my big toe, or if you want the ID, it's TWCJR44.
Yeah, that's his YouTube channel, guys. And
yeah, so if you go there, you've got
really
lots of
your videos. Yeah, guys, go check out his YouTube channel, because his videos will blow your mind. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that kind of gives you an idea of what it is I'm trying to summarize here in the next 5 minutes. It's an awful lot of stuff. And obviously it's not going to sound real rational to you when you take that much stuff and stuff it into a very short amount of time. It sounds just a little off the wall and a little crazy, but I let you know that if it sounds that way to you and you would really like to understand it better, there's other resources that you can go to figure this out. Well, the description in a nutshell is that reality is based on information. Okay, and the digital physicists, digital physics was a movement started by Edward Fredkin in the late 1990s, and digital physicists agree with that. They say that reality is information, and therefore the conclusion is that this is a simulation. That's what it means for this to be information. It means that this is a simulated reality. It's generated on a computer, if you will, or by a computer. That kind of puts it into a metaphor that's easy for us to understand today. It's like your World of Warcraft and your Sims game. It's a virtual reality. That's what we mean by virtual reality. Okay, now when you go there, as Fredkin points out, the first piece of logic that kind of hits you in the face is that, well, a simulation cannot simulate itself. then it has to be simulated elsewhere. Well, if this is a simulation of our entire universe, then elsewhere has to be beyond our entire universe. So Fredkin said, he called that other. He says the simulation source is in other. And he couldn't really tell you a whole lot about other, but that's where he left it, and that's basically where the digital physics movement leaves it.
Right.
And what I bring to that equation, well, that and a lot of other things, is that consciousness is the computer. Okay? Consciousness is a digital information system. And because it's not in this physical universe, it's obviously not physical, because anything that's not in this physical universe is non-physical to us. That's how we define physical in this physical universe. If you were an elf in the World of Warcraft, what would be your physical world? It would be the set in World of Warcraft. Where the server is, where the computer room is, where the server is, that would not be physical to you. That's not part of your physical reality. That's non-physical. And consciousness, being in other, being non-physical, this information system you would expect it to be non-physical, because information is non-physical. How much does information weigh? What's the volume of a piece of information? You see, physical things have mass, have volume, right? That's what Newton told us about it. You know, no two things can occupy the same space. That's because everything that's physical has to have space, has to have some extent to it, and it has to have some mass. Otherwise, it's not physical.
Right.
Okay. With maybe photons being the exception of the mass thing, but a photon really doesn't exist. They only exist at the speed of light. So that's how that little seemingly contradiction works out. Anyway, so that's kind of the big picture. So we live in a virtual reality that is a product of consciousness. Consciousness being an information system that is non-physical, because information is non-physical. Maybe I should talk a little bit more about that concept, and that is that a book, we think of, well, here's a book, and it's got a lot of information in it. Well, the paper is not the information. The ink is not the information. The information is the content, the meaning. That's the information that's in the book. It's not the code symbols in ink. It's not the paper. The paper is the media, and then we have the code symbols that are on the media. But the information itself, the meaning, the significance of those code signals is the information. That meaning and significance is obviously not physical, and it requires a consciousness both to encode it there, and only a consciousness can encode, and only a consciousness can read.
Yes, that is fascinating. So that's an interesting distinguishment there, because, yeah, I mean, you know, I have a very shallow understanding of these ideas. You know, I have a very limited understanding of these ideas. So actually, in my perception, I always assumed that the information was literally the ones and zeros, or the code symbol, so to speak, in the book. But you're saying that it's not enough just to be code symbols. That, would you say that what you're trying to say is that it's also the interpretation or the crunching of those code symbols by a consciousness that turns it into information? Is that what you're putting forward?
Let's put it this way. Let's take a whole bunch of ones and zeros and let's put them all in a box, shake it up, and throw them out on a piece of paper. What sort of information do you have? The code symbols themselves don't carry any information. Information is the order in which those ones and zeros are put, and a way to interpret them. Or we can back off of ones and zeros, make it a little more intuitive. Put a bunch of letters from the alphabet in a box, shake them up, and throw them out on a piece of paper. And what sort of information do you have? You just have a bunch of alphabet soup, a bunch of letters laying around in no particular order. Randomness. So you get information when you reduce the randomness, when you provide structure, okay, to the bits. That creates information, and in science that's called reducing entropy. When you reduce randomness and create structure, then you have reduced the entropy of the system. So that brings us really to the next point in describing this theory, and that is that an information system evolves. It's not a static system. This information system evolves by lowering its entropy. If it had very high entropy, it just have random bits, would have no meaning. There'd be no information to it, and therefore it'd have no structure, and it would really have nothing. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be anything. But now, if it can decrease its entropy, provide some structure somehow to these ones and zeros, now it's creating information. So the information is in the structure. So I can ask you the same question: how much does structure weigh? You see, it's the same thing. How much space does structure take up? You see, it doesn't take up any space at all. The ink blots that make the code symbols, or the ones and zeros, or the alphabet letters, they take up space, but that's just code symbols. The information is in the structure. The structure has no mass. The structure has no, extent. Now, the things that make up the structure do. If these are little wooden, little child blocks, right? And the child block has mass and it takes up space, but that's not the structure. The structure is putting that block in a position relative to other blocks so that it has content. You see?
Yeah.
So that's the point. So information is non-physical, and the idea that information creates your reality is really an easy thing to understand, because what is your reality? It's what you take in through your senses. Shut all your senses off so you cannot see anything, hear anything, smell anything, feel anything, okay, or taste anything. All of those are zeroed out. Now, what's your reality like? Just consciousness floating in a black void with no input. You see, your reality's gone. What produces your reality? Information. Now that information, let's say, that comes to your eye, what does it do? Well, it turns into electrical impulses in the retina. So that's information. Now we've got what you saw encoded in electrical pulses. So just information, organizations of neurons, and that sort of thing. It's just information. Again, it's structure that is structured in particular ways. The information, but the information is not physical. The information is what creates our reality. So see how it's an easy step to see that if this reality is based on information, which is what most of the physics experiments are telling us. The experiments that leave people scratching their head are all pointing to the direction that the nature of our reality here, of our physical reality, is information. Nothing else really answers the mail quite so well as that concept.
So it's the physical world is information. Would you say that it's information in the sense that without a subjective consciousness to interpret that information, which we call the objective world, without a subjective consciousness, does the external world not exist, or does it simply just not exist in the way that we typically think it does? What's the distinguishment there?
All right, I'll try to straighten that out. The answer to both your questions is yes. And, it's like this. Let's look at the World of Warcraft elf, or we can look at a Sims character. Either one's the same thing. But we'll look at the World of Warcraft elf, and we'll say, all right, now let's say that the World of Warcraft is open up on the server, but for some reason, no player has logged in. There are absolutely no players, okay? Now, the big deep question here is, what happens to all the buildings and people and grass and trees and mountains in World of Warcraft? Do they just disappear? Where do they go? You see, when nobody's is in the game, what happens to them? Well, when we talk about World of Warcraft, that sounds ridiculous, right? Well, of course not. They're just virtual, Of course, the server's not computing trees and mountains just to create trees and mountains. It waits till somebody logs into the game, And when that person logs into the game, depending on which way they're looking, how that character's oriented, they will send a data stream to that person's computer that describes that reality, right? So if you have 100 people playing in World of Warcraft, then there's 100 data streams going out to each one of those players. Now that player is a consciousness, right? And that elf is like an avatar. It's like your body. Okay, so you're the consciousness, and until a consciousness requires the data, the server isn't just sending out data to send out data to nobody. I mean, where would it send it? To itself, you know?
Right.
There's nothing to do, you see, so it doesn't make any sense. So this physical reality is physical because a data stream is coming to your consciousness, and when that data stream gets this information, that data, it sees, hears, smells, tastes, and touches, and feels this reality. That's what you've got. And it's a multiplayer game, just like World of Warcraft, so players can interact with each other, or they can interact with the computer. They can make plans together, they can do all sorts of things. So it's a similar kind of thing. So you say, if there's no consciousness, to receive the data, what happens to the world? Well, the world was never there in the first place. It's just information. It only exists in the consciousnesses of the players. You see, it's an interactive game. So it's the same. Just think of if you make the parallel with, say, World of Warcraft or The Sims, then all of these questions become rather obviously trivial as to why it is. So people say, well, do you mean if I'm not looking, the stuff disappears? No, I mean, if you're not looking, there's no data being sent to you to show you what you're not looking at. You can't see what you're not looking at because it's not in the data stream it's being sent to you.
Right.
And if there's other people looking at it, then it is being sent to the data stream that they have. And if there's nobody at all looking at it, it's not being sent to anybody in any data stream.
Does the data exist objectively? Meaning, obviously, if you're not receiving it, then for you, you're not interpreting it, and you're not, molding it through your 5 sense, vehicle and shaping it to the physical world we see. So this kind of gets into the question of the objective versus the subjective. Does the data still exist if you're not receiving it, or
the system is a probabilistic system. When we talk about a virtual reality being computed someplace, this is not a deterministic computation. It's not a deterministic model. So all the little details don't have to be computed. It's a statistical, probabilistic simulation. Okay? Very much the way World of Warcraft is. That's a probabilistic simulation too. You take a swing at the monster and somebody runs a random number generator to tell you, how hard you hit it or how hard it hit you. There's a random component going on there. Well, this isn't exactly like that. There is one fundamental difference between us and World of Warcraft, and that is that World of Warcraft is programmed. Our virtual reality simply evolved. And we can go into that. It is not programmed. It evolved. Well, let me just, since I mentioned that, let's say, how does it evolve? Well, you start with some initial conditions, like a lot of a high pressure, high temperature plasma that takes up a very little bit of space, and it has certain temperatures and pressures, and those are all your initial conditions of describing that plasma and how tight and little, all the rest of it. And then you punch the run button, and when you do, you let the rule set that you have that governs energy exchanges, you let that rule set see whatever happens, happens. See, it's a simulation. And what happens, that rule set is called our physics. It's a science. We've dug out a lot of the nuggets of the rule set and call it physics. So you let it go, and what happens? Well, that's what we call the Big Bang. That little ball of plasma expands, and as it expands, it cools. As it cools, things solidify. Gravity pulls things together. You get globs. Eventually, you get our universe, and you get our solar system. You get our planet, and you get us, all out of evolution from those initial conditions and the rule set.
And let me
so
ask
here
you,
we are. We've got this evolved. Instead of World of Warcraft that's programmed, we have an evolved set, and we're still evolving.
So let me ask you, one of the first question that comes to mind when I consider this theory is, well, if this is some kind of a simulation, then who is it? Just an infinite regression, an infinite series of simulations within a simulation within a simulation, or is there ever an ultimate initial creator without an initial creator that created that, or am I just seeing this entirely wrong?
Well, what you have to understand is that we can't answer that question, and that's not because we don't have enough information. It is theoretically impossible to answer that question, so you have to come to a I don't know. The reason it's theoretically impossible to do that is that we can only perceive and logically deduce things that are, say, one step out of our own system, if you will. You know, we can't say with any surety about anything that's outside of our own system. Maybe that's about it. We can make conjecture about maybe one step outside, but it's just conjecture. So we are consciousness. We are part of the consciousness system. I call it the larger consciousness system. We can't get outside of consciousness to know what may have been a cause, if you will, for the consciousness system. We just can't do that because it's an impossible thing. If you're consciousness, you can't get outside of consciousness because you're not outside of consciousness. You're consciousness.
Let me ask
That's
you,
what
Tom,
you are.
Let me ask you, Tom. I've always been obsessed with the question why. Like, I always want to know, like, why are we here? What's the whole damn purpose? In your personal opinion, do you think that's kind of a futile question that I shouldn't? Because I feel like it's so damn important.
No, actually, it's a very good question, and that's one of the good things about this theory is that it answers those questions very clearly and not with any not with any caveats.
Yeah.
It tells you exactly why we're here and what the point is and what we're doing here and so on. So that sort of thing it can answer because that has to do with the system itself.
What
that has
is
to
our
do
purpose?
with being consciousness. Okay, well, let me back up just a little bit so we make it all kind of coherent here instead of just jumping into that. So we have this larger consciousness system. That's where we kind of were with this big model. And this larger consciousness system is evolving. It's lowering its entropy by creating information, by creating structure, by getting its ones and zeros not being random, but by having some sort of meaning or significance to itself. All right? So now we have a purpose, at least for the larger consciousness system. Its purpose is to lower its entropy. Now, if it doesn't lower its entropy, that means if it doesn't create information out of its randomness, it just becomes random, in which case it becomes nothing, no information. So if you're an information system, that's death. You dissolve, you become nothing at all. So you have this consciousness system, it's an information system. In order to stay alive, if you will, it has to lower its entropy. And in its mind, that's growth. You know, it has to change, it has to evolve. It's evolving like, we do, like our physical reality evolves. So it has a purpose, and that's to stay alive, lower its entropy. Now, you find out that consciousness, just like the single cell things in our biology found out that a way to lower their entropy, a way to grow and become more survivable and procreate and survive, was to cooperate, to lower entropy, to build up more complex systems. So we had a single cell divided to make multi-celled things. And then multi-celled things got more complicated and had specialization of cells. So you had the locomotion part and the digestive part and the defense part. And all of these things are more and more complex, lower and lower entropy because it's more and more order and more structure. That's more survivable. Well, it's no different for a consciousness system. It found that it could lower its entropy even more and create more structure if it broke in two and then in many pieces, because then it could have interactions with all of those pieces, just like the single cell did. So then it has its ability to build up even more complex structures, you see. So this is on a path of lowering its entropy. Well, it did that. So now you have a bunch of these you have not one single cell, not one monolithic consciousness, but it has divided itself up into lots of little single cells, if you will, lots of little chunks of consciousness. And because this is an information system, what do these chunks do? They communicate. They share information. They pass structure back and forth, bits and information. That's how they evolve. As the pieces evolve, the whole evolves, because the whole is just as, it's made up of all the pieces. So now what are the pieces? That's you and I, okay? We're pieces of this consciousness system. And the pieces have to be able to interact with free will. They have to be independent in what they do. Otherwise, there is no game here. Just like all of the individual cells had to be independent, or there's no way they could cooperate. If you just had one monolithic conscious system say, all right, I've duplicated 1,000 things and every one of them does exactly what I want it to do, well, you haven't changed anything. You still just have one system. You see, you don't have multiple systems. So it's important that these systems have free will to interact with each other as they will, based on their own consciousness, and that's us. So now, what's our purpose? I'm getting back to your question. Our purpose is to lower our entropy. And what does that mean? Well, in a social system, how does one increase its structure, increase its information in such a way that it builds rather than tears down? Remember, we don't want to tear down. That's randomness. That destroys us. We want to build. Well, that means cooperate, work together. That optimizes itself with a word called love. If you interact with the rest of the players in the system with caring, okay, with compassion, with cooperation, then you optimize that social system. And that's a kind of an easy thing. In the book, I go through some logic to show that that's true, but you can kind of see how that works, particularly if you look at the opposite. The opposite of love is fear. Fear is not about other, it's about self. So if all the pieces are only focused on self, then there's no trust, there's no cooperation, there's none of those things. If somebody something, and the others try to take it away from them because they want it. You see, it's that kind of thing.
Let me ask you: is there a balance between selfishness and altruism? Like, it seems to me that to a certain degree, it's important to think about yourself. You work to be a healthier, happier, more confident person. Do you mean 100% altruism, 100% just ignore yourself for others, or do you think there's like a balance between helping others but also helping yourself?
Well, I think what your question becomes a problem. If you see the issues right, then the question goes away. The question becomes a problem because you see it as a choice between being entirely altruistic and only doing things for others, doing things that are good for yourself. Like, should you come out of the rain, when it rains? Well, that'd be doing something for yourself. Well, there you are in the rain. You just stand there because that doesn't have anything to do with other. Well, you see, that's silly, of course. Now, here's the way we define the difference between love and fear, and what we're talking about, the self, would be ego, ego-focused. When you have free will, you have awareness, okay? You're aware. You can make choices. That's what free will means. If you couldn't make choices, then free will wouldn't mean anything. So you're an aware entity, and you have free will. Now, if that awareness is in the service of fear, we call that ego. If that awareness is not in the service of fear, if it's in the service of caring, then you see, that's not ego. And it doesn't really have to be just, caring about other all the time. It can be caring about yourself too.
Right.
But it can't be in the service of fear. So awareness in the service of fear is the problem. So it's not just about, do you do things for yourself or you do things for others. That's the wrong way to divide up the pie. It's, are you doing things because of fear? Are you doing things not because of fear, for other reasons? Now, if the answer is fear, then yes, we should get rid of it, and get rid of it entirely. There is none of that that's good for us. And if you're not using your awareness for fear, then that's something that can be constructive. It could be neutral as well. It doesn't have to be constructive, but at least it's neutral. It doesn't get to be negative until it's fear-based.
What do you think about what the word love tends to represent in like the mainstream of society? Like if you listen to like a love song on the radio, or if you hear like the pop culture interpretation of love, is there a difference between what you mean by love and what other interpretations out there might be?
Well, yeah, love is a very I won't say overused word, it's underused, but it's a very squishy kind of a word. It means a lot of things, right? If you want to make love, what does that mean?
It means sex.
That means sex, period. That's what that's about.
Yeah.
If you go to the Greeks, they had 4 or 5 words for love, because love wasn't just a one singular monolithic thing. In our culture, we don't. We just have one word, so that kind of means everything. And it's got, if you go to the dictionary and look at love, you'll probably find, 4 or 5 subsets, different meanings for that word. So there isn't just a definition for love, because our language doesn't, our language lumps a whole lot of things into that one term.
Yeah.
Now, in my book, I define love technically, if you will. Love is the result of a low entropy consciousness. Love is low entropy consciousness. That's love. So that's like a technical definition of love. As a consciousness lowers its entropy, it becomes love. So that's one way of looking at it. Now, by love, I mean that you're focused. Well, you're not focused on fear, okay? You are, for the most part, it's about other. But your question there, well, does it always have to be about other? No,
Mm-hmm.
If you're planning, let's say you're making plans and you decide, when I grow up, I want to build bridges or I want to fly airplanes. Well, you then need to start making some plans. You need to be building some structure, and what kind of education do you need to build bridges or fly airplanes? What kind of experience do you need? How do I get that education and experience? What do I need to do? So all those plans, that's not about other, that's about yourself. But that's not fear-based. That's just now it could be fear-based if you're saying, oh, I want to have a lot of money when I grow up because I want to have power and I want to be able to do this. And that's why I want to build bridges and fly airplanes so I can make a lot of money. Well, then that's fear-based. You see, that's the wrong reason for doing that thing. So it's not the action we find out that carries the moral value. It's the intent that carries the moral value. It's not so much what you do as it is why you do it that makes a thing moral or not moral. So here we are, we back up, we'll pull a few things together. We've got this consciousness system. It's split just like the cells did. It's got pieces, they interact with themselves. The optimal interaction is one of love, which if you want to talk about opposites, you could say not fear, okay? What's not fear, will fall under the love category, and what is fear can't be love, because now we're talking about motivation. We're talking about intent, not about actions, not about what somebody does or doesn't do, but what's driving them. You see, if they're being driven by fear, then not love. Otherwise, either neutral, could be love, or we'll just call it love. The opposite of fear is love. The opposite of love is fear. So you can define something by putting a not in front of its opposite.
Right.
So that's kind of where we are. Then we have a purpose, and our purpose is to lower our entropy. And what does that mean? That means become love. That means we need to be thinking not in terms of fear. Now, if ego is kind of free will and awareness in the service of fear, then obviously we want to get rid of ego. Ego is not self-awareness. It's self-awareness in the service of fear. Okay? So just because it has to do with you, that's not what I'm calling ego. Now, basically, you might think that's really a kind of an unusual or a weird definition of ego. But it's not, actually. It's just about the same, very, very close to the same definition that Freud used when he used the word ego. And why is that? Because most all of us are driven, most all of the time, by fear. That's why we do the things we do for the most part. We're very fear-driven as a species, as people. This It's just the way we are here in this learning lab, or if you will, virtual reality trainer for consciousness, to reduce its entropy, and this lower your entropy virtual reality trainer. This is not a graduate school or a college or even a high school. This is a daycare. The level of consciousness here is mostly pretty low and mostly motivated by fear.
Can I ask you real quick, what is physical pain, or is it even real, or is it just a reflection of fear? Because I've always thought like physical pain seems odd. It never seemed real to me. And so you just look at all these cases where people can overcome physical pain through like a certain kind of meditation. There's those videos of monks in the 70s, I think it was, self-immolation, where they light themselves on fire as a form of activism, and they can just like meditate through it and not feel anything. So physical pain has always seemed to not be as concrete as we think it is. Is it real, or is it just a manifestation of fear? Like, the more you fear death, the more you're going to associate physical pain as being a bad thing, because you associate physical pain with the deterioration of your body, hence death. What do you have about?
Okay.
What do you know about physical
All right.
pain?
The problem that you have, and the reason it gets into a difficult thing to explain, is that say, is it real? Okay. Now, what you mean when you say, is it real? Is this physical pain physical? Because in your mind, you've got this cultural belief that to be real, you have to be physical. So when you say, is it real? Is it physical? And then, of course, it's not physical. You see, it's a perception, right? It's subjective. So is it real? Of course, it's as real as your body is. Is your body real? Your body's just information. Okay, so I would answer it as nothing's real. If you want to look at it that way, there is nothing real. It's all information. It's all mind. It's all your choice. Now, if you choose not to feel the pain, well, that's a choice. You are consciousness. You get a data stream. The rule set says that, okay, there's this ragged, cut going down, the side of your arm, and that would create stimuli, nerves, and so on, and that would be interpreted typically as pain. But your consciousness, you can interpret that data however you want to interpret that data. So if you say, well, no, I'm not going to interpret that data as pain, and I can learn not to do that. Well, there are training things that you can go to if you have, let's say, you have bad kidneys, and one of the effects of having bad kidneys is that you may have to go on dialysis periodically, but there may be a lot of pain associated with it, chronic pain. Now, here are your choices. Live with the chronic pain, and the pain can be disabling to the point you can't talk, walk, or do anything with it. Then it's hard to live with that at a very high quality of life. You can take drugs that make the pain go away, and now you're a zombie, or you now are on drugs all the time, and that's not a very good way to live. Or you can learn to manage that pain with your intent, which means with practice you can learn to turn off and reinterpret those pain signals as something else. You can either ignore them or interpret them in another way. And there are pain clinics that thousands of people go to learn how to do that. So yes, that's one of the options. Now, everybody isn't good at doing it. Some people pick it up very quickly and some don't. Why? Because they resist the idea that they can make that choice to reinterpret that data. And if they really believe that that's impossible and they can't do it, guess what? It'll be impossible and they won't be able to do it, because they will always go, no, it's still there. See, I can feel it. I knew I would. Which means they're not really reinterpreting it. They're hanging on to the old interpretation because they believe that's the only interpretation that's possible. So if you're in a belief trap and you get caught in that, then you can't take advantage of these pain clinics that teach you how to get rid of your pain. But if you can get over that belief, get out of that belief trap, then tens of thousands of people have learned how to manage their pain with their intent, with their mind. So is the pain real? Well, it's as real as anything else. It's data, it's information. That's as real as it gets, is being data or information. but you are consciousness, and you get a data stream, and how you interpret that data has to do with you as the consciousness. That's why everything is subjective. Everything you get in that data stream is a subjective interpretation. That's why you have 5 people all standing on the same corner, see an accident, you get 5 completely different accident reports from those 5 people, because they all see it different ways. They all have different things that they pick on, different things that they make assumptions about, and different ways of describing what happened. That's because everybody lives in their own personal reality, which is defined by that data stream and by how they interpret the data. So here we are in a multiplayer game, and in a multiplayer game, you generally agree with the other players in there. What you're seeing, everybody kind of agrees they see mountains over there, or a tree growing right next to the building, because that's the way the set's laid out. So in everybody's data stream, and we all can interpret that more or less the same. But does everybody see exactly the same tree? No, everybody see exactly the same colors. Everybody doesn't see exactly the same textures, or even see as well as others. Some people are nearsighted, some people are farsighted. We don't all see exactly the same thing, but we see close enough to the same thing, and we interpret it close enough to the same thing that we can kind of communicate about it and pretend that it's exactly the same. But the tree that I see is not the same tree that you see. If we're both standing there looking at the tree, we don't see the exact same thing. I'm noticing the little ants that are running up and down, out of the tree, and you don't even notice those, because you're noticing, something else about the tree, the texture of the bark or some other kind of thing. So we don't see the same things. We interpret the data differently. We selectively pull some of that data out to interpret because we like it, it makes sense to us, it resonates with us, and the rest of it we just ignore. We don't even notice that it's there. So we all live in our own personal reality, but it is a multiplayer game. So is pain real? Sure, it's as real as you are. It's as real as anything. It's information. But as consciousness, is it a slam dunk? Do you have to, interpret it in a given way? No, you can interpret it in your own way.
Because here I am trying to ask you a question about the spatial location of consciousness, but of course space kind of implies the common paradigm of looking at things. But I guess I'll ask it to you anyways, and you can give me the best answer you got.
Just go ahead.
Where is consciousness at? Is outside, like assuming like this is a simulated reality, is it outside of it, or was it programmed into this simulation?
Okay, what is space?
Yeah.
Again, you can answer these questions if you ask them pretending that you're the elf in the World of Warcraft. So you're an elf in World of Warcraft, and you run around in that map, and you fight monsters, and you jump off cliffs, and you do things in there, and somebody asks you, what's space? Well, you run around in space in that, and what is space? Space is just a calculation, right? It's space in a computer. Another way of looking at it, there's all sorts of computer models, right? What about the flight simulation model? You get in your airplane and you're simulated flying an airplane. Well, where's the space that you're flying around in? You see? Where is that space? Well, there is no space. All there is information. Space is a product of the information. It's calculated. The space in that airplane, simulation that you fly around in, that space is simulated. It's simulated space. Our space is simulated space as well. Now let's ask your other question. You're the elf, and you've been running around in this World of Warcraft map for a long time, and you say, well, if this is a computed reality, you've kind of figured that out. So if this is a computed reality, where's it being computed? Well, first of all, like we said before, you would have to realize that it's being computed outside of your World of Warcraft map, outside of reality, which makes it non-physical to you, the elf. Okay? And it is outside of your reality. It's not like you can, go over the final mountain and find the server. The server's not behind the mountain. The server is not in that reality. It's outside. And that server is non-physical to the elf. The elf has a physical reality, and it's all of the stuff that it can touch and feel and smell and taste, all of what its senses say is there. The things that are outside of its senses are non-physical to it. It's the sense data that you define as physical. Okay, so the elf says, well, where is it? Is it out there somewhere? Well, from our viewpoint, being beings of that outside reality, we say, yeah, it's outside, that's just information, and the server, is in this other reality frame, and it's non-physical to you, elf, but it's physical to us. Well, then you find out what is physical and non-physical. Say, what is this physical and non-physical? Physical and non-physical don't really mean anything in particular. They're just a point of view. It depends on the observer. If you're an elf, what's physical is your World of Warcraft map. Right. If you're a person that's a programmer of World of Warcraft, then what's physical is this physical universe. If you're consciousness, you get a different answer altogether. So if you're in a different virtual reality, let's say you're in a dream reality, that's another virtual reality. Well, at the time you're in that dream reality, running from monsters or, making love to the girl next door or whatever you do in your dreams, while you're in that dream reality, that seems physical. And the reality where your body is lying in a bed asleep is non-physical. That's not part of it. So what is physical and non-physical is just a point of view of the observer. It's not a fundamental property of anything. So being physical is a fundamental property. It's just a relative. That's what I call it's the next relativity theory. When the relativity theory that Einstein did says there is no fundamental inertial frame. All inertial frames are basically the same. They're all relative. And the next step up is there is no fundamental reality frame. All reality frames are just relative to others. So the ones that we're in, the observer says, well, this one's physical. That's kind of the way that works. So see, most of your questions that just don't seem to have good answers, like, where does the world go when nobody looks? And, what's this, does there have to be a certain amount of ego to balance, the other side? And most of those questions are hard because you're not looking at the problem right, because you have a fundamental belief system about physical is fundamental, everything else is kind of secondary and based off the physical. If you have a dream, then you don't see that as another reality frame in a different data stream. You see that as some kind of function of the physical brain, making stuff up. So you give everything a physical basis. And when you give everything a physical basis, you create a whole bunch of paradoxes that don't seem to make sense and don't seem to have good answers. You see, and they really do have good answers if you just look at the problem in the right way. Then all of this stuff just kind of falls out. One of the things that falls out of this is that you can explain physics better. The double slit experiment, explanations, why are particles probability distributions, the fundamentals of quantum mechanics, the fundamentals of relativity, why is the velocity of light invariant under the motion of its source? What that you would hear is c is a constant. Why is that? Well, physics says we don't know. We know it is, but we don't have any idea why. Well, the same theory tells you why. Those things are like that. Also, what did the Buddha mean when he said that all of this world was just maya, it was just imagination. The world is illusion, and the Taoists would say the same thing. It's just an illusion. What did they mean by that? You see, so it explains physics, it explains metaphysics. The paranormal becomes normal because that just falls out as logical consequences of the nature of consciousness. And all these things just kind of fall out with very logical and straightforward explanations. And we get ourselves all balled up in it because we have these beliefs about the way the world is that kind of we paint ourselves into a corner that doesn't contain the solution is the problem. So we've answered a lot of your questions now as to, what do we hear? Who are we? We're pieces of consciousness. We're all netted. individuated units of consciousness and all netted with each other. We all have free will. Our purpose here is to make choices such that we reduce our entropy, which means grow up, get rid of fear, get rid of belief. The things disappear and we don't look at them. No, they were never there in the first place. It's just data. The mountains don't disappear in the World of Warcraft. Like now the programmers have to go get the mountains and put them in a drawer because nobody's there. The mountains don't exist in and of themselves. Well, neither do our bodies, neither do any of that. So then you're thinking, well, but with that physical brain, if my physical brain gets damaged, somebody hits me over the head with a lead pipe and damages my physical brain, then my body doesn't work. So the physical brain must really be in charge. That's not the case. What happens is the physical brain is no more physical than your body is. It's just a virtual brain. What happens is that the rule set, and if you get hit in the head with a lead pipe, the rule set says you're going to have more constraints on what you can do. You may have constraints on memory or constraints on your ability to walk or do other kinds of things because the rule set has evolved everything the way it is. All the structure we have here that we call physical is just evolved as logical consequences of the rule set. Well, you mess with those logical consequences of the rule set, you mess up with the structure. You saw that third, you saw one of the legs off of a chair and it becomes unstable. There's consequences by the rule set. Well, you hit somebody and damage their brain, their virtual brain, then it changes what's allowed in the data stream. The data stream has to abide by the rule set. So it becomes another constraint by which you have to abide. The same thing happens in World of Warcraft. If there's a tree, then your World of Warcraft elf cannot walk through that. There's a constraint that the rule set for World of Warcraft puts on that elf. If the elf goes underwater and can't come up, it'll drown. If it jumps off a high cliff, it'll get damaged. It may kill itself in the fall. All these things are constraints that the World of Warcraft rule set puts on the elf, and what the elf can do and what the elf can't do. The elf can't run 100 miles an hour because the rule set in World of Warcraft doesn't include that. Now, it may be able to jump 10 feet in the air, or it may even be able to, lions might be able to fly. The rule set can pretty well do what it does, but our rule set isn't arbitrary like one that's programmed. Our rule set had to be one that started with the basic rule set and some constant inputs and evolved. This whole virtual reality, this whole universe had to evolve. So it couldn't be just any constants and any rules, or it wouldn't have evolved a stable structure that consciousness could then play in.
Let me ask you real quick, when you do out of body or astral projection, is that a breaking of the rules, or is that within the rules? It's just something we commonly do nowadays.
Well, that's entirely within the rules. We are consciousness. We're a subset of consciousness. As consciousness, we have entree to the whole larger consciousness system. We can get around in that system. We can go to other virtual realities. We can do all sorts of things because we are consciousness. So we can explore that system. We're not trapped here in this physical reality because this physical reality is just a virtual reality within consciousness. We are consciousness. So we can travel anywhere. We just need to know how. We need to have the experience and be able to know how to do it, but it's all open to us. What we can't do is travel outside of the consciousness system. That's why we can't say whether our larger consciousness system is just another simulated system from some other simulated system, or whether it indeed is the original thing, whatever that was, that had a 1 and a 0 into what it is today.
And of course, even then, we're still stuck with the causality question.
Yeah, well, the problem with the causality, it's not, but the thing is, people say it's a failure if you end up in an infinite series. Well, there is no infinite series. What there is that we get to a point that we say outside of this consciousness system is beyond our knowing. It's not a failure to say that. It's a logical, consequence. We have to say that. In my books, I have the example of a bacterium in the gut, in the let's say the small intestine. So if you have a bacteria in your intestine, what can that bacterium know about sunshine and rain two basic things that produce food, because what that bacterium does is processes food, right? Food comes like manna from heaven, it just falls out of a pipe, and the bacteria work on it. Now, where does that food come from? Well, it needs to come from someplace. As far as the bacteria, no, it just occurs. It doesn't have to come from someplace. And if those bacteria were absolutely brilliant, they could not tell you about nuclear fusion in the sun, rain, horses and cows and pigs and crops and fertilizer and tractors and refrigerators and supermarkets and all the stuff that's necessary before that food comes down that pipe to them, before that manna from heaven gets to them. So you come to the conclusion that it's just outside their ability to know. They're just not equipped to go there, you see. So it's not like with stupid bacteria, they're just not clever enough. Doesn't matter how clever they are.
No.
They just aren't going to get there.
So it's not because they're situationally away from where the food is coming from. It's simply that they cannot grasp, or they don't have the capacity to understand that.
Yeah, now in our say, we say, well, they don't have the sensors to sense that. They don't have eyes to see, and they don't, have noses to smell, and they don't have sensors. They just can't do that. It's not part of their reality. They can't go there. You see? So that's the thing, and we are in the same boat. So it's not a failure of the logic to end up saying, I don't know. It's just an awareness of a limitation of knowledge. You just have to realize, don't know. Now I can make a few things up, and you can do some conjecture and a few things like that, which I've done in my book. I've gone through and say, well, it could be like this or it could be like that. But then you have to not get carried away with that, to do that with humor, because the fact is, it's a theoretical impossibility to know what's outside of the system that contains you. Now, this physical reality doesn't contain you. You see, it's just a virtual reality. So I can get outside of this physical reality and go travel. That's what remote viewers do. That's what people out of body do. That's what people with precognitive dreams do. That's what all sorts of people can get information outside of this system. It's available. You just need to know how to do that, because your consciousness, it's there. So you're not trapped in the physical universe, but you are trapped in the larger consciousness system. And
Here's the thing. I would think that there would be like some kind of a back door, because again, I'm coming from the causality perspective, but maybe causality can still apply to the creation of consciousness itself. I would, from my typical understanding of the world, I would assume that even if our consciousness was created by something bigger or just something else, you would think that there would be some kind of connection, some kind of a back door from which this came from that created this consciousness.
Yeah, and there may be. And you can do that kind of hypothetical stuff. You just don't take it too seriously. You see, you don't know. Just like the bacterium. All right, go in with a pair of tweezers, pull out that bacterium, and set it up on a little thing so we can watch the farm work and see where the food's made. All right, now, what does the bacterium get out of that? Nothing whatsoever. You see, bacterium's not equipped to even deal with that. So, but is that farm important to that bacteria? Well, very important. Otherwise, it wouldn't need any food to crunch on, and if it didn't have any, eventually the bacteria would all die. So it's critically important to that bacteria that stuff is there, because that supports its system. But can it perceive it? Can it understand it? Can it grasp it? No. It can make conjecture. It can say, well, there's this food thing that lives outside in a non-physical reality that's not physical to us bacteria, and it just manifests at the end of this pipe, and it drops down here, and we work, maybe come up with a whole religion about that, that food factory that drops food down the pipe, but it's all just conjecture. You see, it's not. You have to learn to live gracefully with uncertainty. That's the key here. You have to learn to live gracefully with uncertainty. You cannot do it all. You have to understand. You have limits. All right, now you can say, well, there may be something else that feeds that, but there may just be some place where something just exists. In other words, it just had the right constituents to come together that created a, let's call it some, in our own metaphors, let's call it a potential energy form that could differentiate this way from that way. And that's what there was initially. And that's all there was. It's just this potential energy that had this very, very vague self-awareness that it was this way, but then it could be that way. Well, what do you have? You have a system with a 1 and a 0, right? This way and a that way. And that system can evolve. And that system then can evolve to zillions of 1s and 0s with all kinds of patterns and structure and low entropy. And you end up with the larger consciousness system. So you can see how it may have just happened from some very rudimentary and basic things. It didn't just have to all of a sudden be, poof, you have a consciousness system. You just have the potential to create a system, and over time, with evolution, that potential actually forms a system. Same way our cells that created life here. Where did the first cell come from? That evolved into eventually human beings, but started out as amoebas and that kind of stuff. Bacterium. Where did that first cell come from before it duplicated? Well, we can create life in a test tube with, you get the right kind of chemical soup together, put a little charge to it, a little something to stimulate the action, and you can actually make things that look like they are, living organisms. In other words, they're organisms that react to things. So what happened? You just had the potential for something, and one day, out of a billion chances and tries, it just happened that they came together right, and that survived because it was more survivable. It worked, you see. So it goes on, and then eventually it splits, and then eventually it, makes specialization, and eventually it turns into us. But all of those eventuallys just happened, and because they worked, they continued. The ones that didn't work die away. It makes evolution look brilliant, but actually, for every success that evolution has, it probably has millions of failures that you don't see. So that's how this works. So there was just some potential out there to differentiate. It was sort of this way or that way. It kind of had this sense, and that's all you need. If you've got that, you've got a potential to grow. And where did that come from? Just it evolved. What do they call it? Emergent complexity. You start with chaos, and if there's a potential to create something out of that chaos, eventually randomness will create it. And if it is good and it meets the criteria for survival in that format, in that environment, it will survive and persist and continue to evolve. And that's how you get something out of nothing. It's called emergent complexity, and you need a potential. And in this case, this is a statistical probabilistic reality. You only need a probability that it could take place. So that's the best I can give you about the source, is that the source just happened to come together, and it was extremely crude. True, you don't just pop up a consciousness system. You're this very crude thing, but given enough time, that crude thing will evolve into this very brilliant and clever thing that can make simulations to help itself evolve. But that takes a very long time.
So, is it possible that the question of causality is fundamentally like a delusion?
Well, no, it's just you have to limit it to your system. In other words, you have systems and subsystems, okay? If you have a system and a system spawns a subsystem, and you happen to live in the subsystem, then you can study the causality of how things work in that subsystem.
Right.
That's all you can know, okay? And if you also are, what can we say? If you also are in a belief trap, you think that subsystem is all there is to reality. There is no more, and all of causality has to be the cause of your little subsystem. Well, the super system from which your subsystem was created doesn't have to follow the same causality. It could have other things going on because it's a larger system, right? You're just a subset of it. It's got things that are not defined in your subsystem. It's got other stuff you don't know about outside of your subsystem. That's why you're a subsystem. It's more complete than you are. So it's got stuff that's unknown, and it's got to stay unknown because you got to stay in your subsystem. You see? So there's stuff in the super system you don't know about. But in that super system, the beings that live there, let's say there are beings there, then they know the causality of the super system. They also know the causality of the subsystem, because that's just a subset of their own larger causality, you see. Yes, causality is a real thing. We have causality in this physical universe called science, right? That's what science does. It studies causality. How do things work? But it's limited to our subsystem. Our physical causality is a great descriptor of how things work in physical reality. Our physical causality do not describe how things work in a superset. You see, that's illogical. You can't take the causality of the subset and think that you ought to be able to describe the superset in terms of the causality of the subset. You can't do that. Illogical, as Spock would say. You know, it just doesn't make sense. So causality is not an illusion. If you don't have causality, you don't have order. You don't have structure. You have to have causality to have structure. Otherwise, this would be a funhouse universe that anything could happen in any way, any time. Thered be no structure here. So you have to have causality. It's real. But you only have a causality that is local to a reality frame. This physical reality, I call it a reality frame. It's got certain rules, and that causality follows that rule set, the way those rules let it follow. Now, you can go to a bigger system, and you still have causality. But it's not physical causality anymore. It's a higher level of causality, you see. So yes, causality is important. So we can make a hypothesis about this thing that's outside of the larger consciousness system that may have given birth to the larger conscious system. And yes, there's a causality, and that causality birthed the larger consciousness system. We don't understand it. We can't talk about it we can talk about it existing, just like the world of Elf could talk about the server existing, but it's only so much that Elf can do about understanding how that server works. He's kind of limited there. Well, we're kind of limited here. So causality is a real thing. It's an important thing, and the larger consciousness system has its own causality that it has to work within its own rules, and right. There may be then another rule set of which it's a subset. But saying that, well, then it's obvious that it's infinite. No, it's not obvious that there's an infinite anything. The larger causality may have been that one thing I talked about that just happened to, do it this way or that way, and then grew up to be this larger consciousness system. For all we know, that's it. There's nothing outside of it. It's it. But what is it? Where is its boundary? What does it interface with? Well, we just don't know. So they're interesting questions, because in our world, everything has a boundary. Everything has a space that encapsulates it. Our universe even has a boundary, right? So we think of things in terms of boundary. We can't think of things any other way. So we think of that other thing, and what is its boundary? Well, just realize that it's outside of your ability to conceive of what that means. We're applying our own little physical reality concepts of space and boundary and location and all that to the rest of the superset that isn't limited like we are. So you just the point where you say, I don't know. And there is no, so just live with uncertainty, and then you go on and do something else more.
Yeah. It is interesting, because for me personally, there is a bit of a correlation between uncertainty and fear. I sometimes get a bit anxious asking the deep fundamental questions about life that I'm uncertain about. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see that.
There's a big connection between uncertainty and fear. Most of what we call belief is like ego. It's part of the problem. It's not part of the solution. And most of the belief we get into has to do with fear. Fear of uncertainty. It makes us fearful, because we want to control. We want to know, because if there are things out there happening that we don't know about, feel vulnerable, you see. That's a fear. Yes. Vulnerable and not knowing and not being able to control it if we do know it, that makes us fearful. And then we make up beliefs. Well, I don't know how this started, but it must have started elsewhere. So how did that happen? If I don't know, and we depend on it, just like bacteria depend on that magic source of food that comes down a tube. Well, then if you have enough anxiety about that, you start talking about gods and demons and things that now, okay, I got it. Yeah, it's the fire god and the tree god and the ocean god and all these things. That's what makes these things that I don't understand. Why do I suddenly get tidal waves? Well, the sea god's angry. All right, that explains it. You see, now I feel better. So a lot of our beliefs are created to make us feel better about our anxiety at not knowing. Uncertainty makes people anxious. And you'll find that a great deal of what bothers you in life will just go away when you finally get the meaning of this little phrase, live gracefully with uncertainty. Because a whole lot of our angst has to do with uncertainty. What happens when I die? Uncertainty. Oh no, so we make up all kinds of beliefs about it, and we have lots of angst about it, lots of fear. Let the uncertainty go.
It's so paradoxical how it all works. Like the impulse to want to control, a lot of times it ends up just backfiring.
Yeah.
And even more ironically is like if you've ever like a person who's not obsessed with control, a person who I guess lives gracefully with uncertainty, a lot of times life just kind of flows nice and easy and well for them.
Exactly. And why that is because the idea of wanting to control, what is that? Fear-based, right? All right, let's say that I'm right and this is a reality where what we are supposed to do here, our purpose, is to let go of fear. Okay? It's to get rid of the fear and get rid of the belief. So here you are with control. That makes you working against the purpose of the whole reality, right?
Yeah.
You're going backwards. You're trying to de-evolve. You're not being part of the solution. You're being part of the problem. And what happens? Well, what's your feedback for screwing up? What's your feedback for not doing what you're supposed to do in reality? Pain, usually. Things don't work right. And you will find that the more you try to control your life, the less you will have control of your life. The more it gets away from you, the more frustrated you get. And when you just let that go and live gracefully with uncertainty, what happens? Life is sweet. Things just, if you need an apple just kind of, there's one right at the end of my toes. All I gotta do is bend over and pick it up. It's just that easy. So, it tells you that if your life is if you're unhappy and there's a lot of pain in your life and a lot of angst, then you have things that are fear-based. That's your ego and beliefs. If you get rid of those, life is good. Life is sweet. So we're in a learning lab and we have feedback.
Tom, let me tell you, that's so fascinating because for about 10 years now, on and off, I've struggled with like panic attacks and anxiety. Sometimes they come, sometimes they go. And most recently, I had a bit of an anxiety attack, basically, back in January of this year. And I was basically, spent like 2 months just kind of worrying and just constantly on edge, really in a almost paralyzed state of anxiety. And I don't know what causes the anxiety, but for whatever reason, I usually when the anxiety comes, a lot of times I associate it with a fear of the uncertainty of life, like the big philosophical questions, why are we here? And it really starts to gnaw at me. And the best advice I got to handle the anxiety was from some website there. And the advice was face it and accept it. Face the anxiety and accept the fact that you have it. And literally, Tom, like within minutes of applying this perspective to the anxiety, it would begin to melt away. And and so it's almost like it's like, okay, let go, stop trying to control it,
exactly,
accept it, go with it, and then that's actually what ends up getting rid of the anxiety. And in my case, that was literally the case. My anxiety was gone within like 2 weeks. 3 months of paralyzing anxiety gone in 2 weeks, applying 4 freaking words.
Right. And when people tell me, well, how do I get rid of ego? How do I get rid of these beliefs? And what I tell them is you have to get rid of the system. And how do you get rid of the fear? The only antidote for fear is courage. And how do you apply the courage? You have to accept the worst. In other words, you tell your fear, give me your worst shot and I will accept it. And if you do that, guess what? The fear no longer has any teeth. It can't bite because you've accepted it.
So true. It's like the old saying, the only way out is through. You got to go through it. You got to face it. You got to let it consume you, so to speak. And in that, well, I guess what you end up realizing is that whatever you were afraid of, most of it was just illusory in the first place.
Exactly. The paper tigers, you see? So you have to have the courage to accept it. Say, all right, I have this fear that nobody will like me, or I have this fear that I'm inadequate, or I have this fear of, whatever. And you have all these fears, and if you say, well, okay, let's just face it. Okay, I'm inadequate. Say you are inadequate, and you're not as good at anything that everybody else is much better than you are. All right, accept it. That's just the way it is. Now, what are you going to do about it? Maybe you ought to start learning some things. Go to school, practice, practice some skills. Make a plan to do something about it. Accept it's the way you are and go on. And if you truly can accept it, the burden's gone. The fear has no teeth because it can't make you feel bad because you've already accepted it. And then what you find out is, I'm not really so bad at all this. Just as much as everybody else about all these things, and I just was thinking it was an illusion, and it turns out to be a paper tiger. But you won't see that as a paper tiger until you have courage to accept the fear.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
And that all works that way because we are in a virtual reality. We're getting rid of fear is the goal, is the object. And the virtual, just like any trainer, when you're in a flight trainer, there's a certain reason for that flight trainer, and the flight trainer will give you feedback. So if you pull on the wrong lever or whatever, you get feedback. Your chair jerks or something happens. It's flash. Your altimeter starts to go off. All these things happen, and that's your feedback. You're going the wrong way. You've done the wrong thing. Trainer for entropy reduction is the same way, and that's why if you don't learn these lessons, if you're not graceful with uncertainty, if you don't let go of fear and learn to accept them and so on, you're always living in strife. You're living in a soap opera. You're wringing your hands. Yeah, you have anxiety attacks. You're unhappy because you want to change the world. You want to control and change things to be the way you want them. Okay, we all do that. We spend most of our time looking up on the front end is how can I manipulate things? How can I arrange things to be the way I want them? We think that about our children, about our spouses, about our jobs, about everything in our life. How can I make sure it comes out in a good way? Okay, that's the way we think. And that's all putting all of our energy in the wrong place. What you need to do instead is put your focus on stuff happens, not how can I make it happen the way I want it, but how can I make the right choices? When that stuff happens, I have choices of how I'm going to deal with it, how I'm going to interact with it. What's my right choice? What's the choice that is a choice toward love rather than toward fear? What's a choice that's not a fear-based choice? That's a caring choice, you see? Now, if you put your focus there, life will become very pleasant. Most of the pain will go away, everything will be great. But if you tend to focus out on the front end of the equation, how can I control it to be the way I want? Well, that's just ego. Ego. How can I make it the way I want it? How can I make things to come out good for me? And your life will never be very happy. And even if in the lottery and somebody gives you $20 million, it'll be fun for a while because you'll buy a bunch of stuff. But give it some years and you'll be just as unhappy as you were before you had all that stuff. You see, that's not the thing. That's not why we're here, is to collect money. If that was the reason we were here, was to collect money, that would make us very happy and our life would get terrific. That's not why we're here. We're here to grow up, you see. And getting the money doesn't make you grow up. So you're just as unhappy as you were before. The money's irrelevant. You can be very happy and be very poor. That's not the point. So if you do things, if you grow up, if you let go of the fear and become love, and that's what you're left with. That's why I say they're opposites. So when you let go of all the fear, then you are love. It's not like then you have to go out and get the love. You are love when you let. So that's what love is. It's a being without fear. What is love? That's what it is. So there, and we talk about, you said, what about the way we think of love? Well, people in our culture don't fall in love so much as they fall in need. Love is about other, and most people fall in love because they find somebody that suits them and their needs and what they want and the kind of things they have to have and the situation they're looking for, etc.
Yeah.
And the other person has to also, you have to meet their needs, and the two people fall in need with each other. Has very little to do with love, and unless they really do learn to love each other, which is really care about the other person, instead of caring about meeting their own needs, that relationship will have its ups and downs and will fall apart. And maybe they'll just kind of tough it out, or whatever. But it's not the kind of relationship that everybody dreams about. The kind of relationship you dream about is based on love, which is about the other person, not about you.
I liken a lot of these modern relationships with this twisted version of love. I liken it to Smeagol, or the Gollum from the Lord of the Rings, and his obsession over the One Ring. He uses, I don't know if you've ever seen the Lord of the Rings before.
Oh yeah.
Well, his love for the ring is a parasitic, just evil, gross thing where he needs the ring like a heroin addict requires heroin.
Right.
And that ties in so much to what I've been thinking for so long now about.
Absolutely. But he doesn't love the ring. He needs the ring.
Exactly.
You see? If he loved the ring, then he would care about the ring and want the ring to be, where the ring should be. But he cares about Gollum, and the Gollum wants the ring. So it's all about him. And people who are very self-focused tend to be miserable. And that's true in a relationship or anywhere else. If it's always about you, you're not doing the game right. And this trainer is going to, is going to stomp on your foot because you're not doing it right. It's not supposed to all be about you. It has to be about other. So make your relationship about the other person. Do whatever you can to make your significant other happy, you see, and don't worry about you or what you'll get back for it. Just do it. There is no such thing, we talk about called unconditional love. Unconditional love is the only kind of love there is. If it's conditional, it's not love.
Wow. Deep, man. Trying to wrap my head around that one. Yeah, the only kind of love is unconditional love.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah.
If the conditions, that's need. Love isn't a contract where I'll do this if you do that. That's a contract for mutual meeting of needs. It's nothing to do with love. Love is always unconditional, and it's about the other person, not about you. Love is something you give away, not something you make arrangements to get. Love, you can't make arrangements for somebody else to love you. That other person has to give you love. Love has to be given. You can't be bartered and bought. Now, people try to buy love with, with money, or resources, or whatever, but it doesn't work that way. Doesn't ever work. So that's why we have such relationship problems. We don't understand really what love is.
Aren't you working on a new book?
Yeah, I got a book on that subject.
Would you like to talk about that real briefly?
Oh, we could talk about that. I do have a book about. It's called Primal Man, Primal Woman. Basically, you take our culture, strip away all the cultural beliefs that have gender and sexuality and male-female, get down to just the basic human being and find out what's under the hood. What is the primal male? How does the primal male relate, to the primal female? Once you've taken all the cultural beliefs and needs and all the rest of it away, what are you left with? What's the fundamental stuff of that relationship? And that's basically what the book is about. It's sort of looking at male and female from a big picture rather than being wound up into the little subset picture, backing off and taking a bigger picture look at it. And that's some of the things we're just talking about. So, most people fall in need. Yeah, it has to be unconditional. It's about other. You want a good relationship, then it needs to be love-based. As long as it's need-based, it's a contract. That's what contracts are. Two people need things that the other has. They write a contract as to how they're going to swap or exchange, or what it is they're going to do for each other. And that's not love. That's That's a contract.
It's amazing how people in relationships are convinced that they're in a relationship based on altruistic, selfless love. It's amazing. Most people think that they are.
Yes, they do. And then when that other person doesn't give them the kind of things that they want, suddenly, oh, you see, what happened to the altruism?
Yeah.
And there's a problem, Well, I really would like it if you do this or do that or not this. This is the kind of man or woman I want, I need. Oh, yeah, it's just altruism. Oh, isn't it? It's about need. It's a negotiated deal is what it is. It's a contract, the marriage contract. That's what it is. You do this and you'll do that. And then what happens? We break the contracts, right? We have affairs. We do all kinds of things, and we break the contract. Why do we break the contract? Happens a lot with contracts, right? Because you see a better deal later on. You get a contract. You're paying this guy $1 a piece for widgets, and now you can get them for 50 cents, or you can get better widgets. You can get chrome widgets instead of wooden widgets, and these kind of deal contracts always have time frames. They're only contract for a certain number of years because everybody knows things change. But we go into these relationship contracts, they'll be forever. They'll be forever. Of course, things change, and they're not forever because they're need-based and they're ego-based, and they come and go as the ego's needs come and go. That's just the way it is. And some people just tough it out. They don't really have a love relationship, but it's better than being single. And besides, they've got the kids to worry about, so they just act nice, and kind of go their own separate ways, and tough it out.
Yeah.
But that's not really what we're looking for either, is it? We're looking for love. Well, if you don't look to get it, that's about you. You got to look to give it. Love is something you give away, not something you contract for. So once you get that concept, then it's easy. Okay, your wife wants you to, put up new curtains and paint the room. That would make her happy. But you just did it a year ago, and the curtains are fine. There's nothing wrong with them, and the paint isn't peeling. So what do that for? No, just paint the damn room, Make her happy. Do what she wants. And what'll happen? She will like you a whole lot for that because you're just giving her, and she will give back because that's a normal, natural reaction to love. You see, a normal, natural reaction to somebody wants something from you is to pull away, kind of tighten your grip. So that's it. In order to get it, you need to give it away.
Right. Do you think there's what if the thing that you want to give your wife is one of those needy things that she egotistically wants from you? Is that a case where maybe you should back off and maybe not give it to her?
Tell me a bit more. This is something that her ego wants you to be a certain way.
Yeah, like probably a million examples. See if I can think of one. For whatever, as you were saying earlier, like if a relationship is based on need, you fall in need. So let's just come up with an example of a need. Like, I don't know, maybe she, trying to think of something fear-based, like trying to control another person from a place of neediness.
Yeah, well, maybe she needs you to make at least $100,000 a year, or maybe
Sure.
she to, impress all her friends, and you always dress like a slob, and you don't impress your friends, so whatever. Yeah, she may have those kinds of needs. Well, what should you do about that? Should you say, well, no, I'm not going to give her that need, because I don't want to do that? Well, that's all about you. Well, do what you can to make her happy. If she wants you to, to dress up in a suit so you impress her friends, and you just can't stand the idea of being in a suit, dress up in a suit, do what she wants. And what'll happen is that she will realize that you care about her. You're trying to do it for her. She knows you don't like wearing suits. It's not like that's a mystery to her. She knows you really don't like it, but you're doing it for her. That'll mean a lot. Right. That will make her change. So why is she needy? She's needy because you're needy, and you're needy because she's needy, and you're both trying to get what you want from the other person. And because each of you know that the other one's trying to get something from you, you each kind of hold on to what you got and don't want to give it away, because that's the way it is when things are fear-based. You see? So you don't want to dress up in that suit to impress her friends, because that's just not You're not going to be what's not you, and then you make all this up, but it's all about you. You see, and she's not going to give you need from her. You know, maybe you want her to wear slinkier clothes and, you know, do this and that and do other kinds of things, and now that's not her, and she doesn't want to do that for you. You see? Well, as long as you both are about yourselves, then it'll just, you know, there's no solution.
Right.
There's no solution. All right, now you say, well, what if the solution's one-sided? All right, I say, I'll just do I'll do as best I can to make you happy, sweetheart. You know, whatever that is, I'll paint your room, you know, I'll put on the suit, I'll do whatever you want. And you do that, then basically you're giving her a space, or you're taking the fear away from her. You're giving her, you're trying to, you know, give her whatever it is she wants. She's not afraid anymore. You're loving her, you're caring about her. And in that place where she no longer has the fear of you pulling away with your needs and so on, and can reach out and start to give more to you, because it's not so scary. You see, so it's like, okay, here's you know, who's going to start? Who's going to go first? You know, this is you know, well, I don't want to go first either. You know, you might abuse. Why go first? Well, that's fear. Your fear of being abused. Just do it. You see what happens, and chances are it won't happen unless somebody goes first. Well, you're the guy. You're in charge. Go first.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of? I don't know, have you ever heard of Brené Brown? Any of her work before?
No.
Yeah, she gave a TED Talk called Power of Vulnerability, and she's the author of a few different books there. Basically, her premise is that in order for humans to have real connections with each other, we have to make ourselves vulnerable. Like just what you mentioned, for example. Maybe you as the partner, you don't want to be the one to initiate helping her. Maybe you don't want to be the one to say "I love you" because you haven't said it in a long time. Mm-hmm. But most people are just waiting for the other person to give them permission to do what both of you want to do, which is to be vulnerable and raw and real with each other. Which I think that just totally applies to what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that neat how this theory of everything kind of explains everything? You know, it just kind of, you know, it just happens to fall together like that. But that's exactly the way it is. You're the guy. Somebody's got to lead it. And if it doesn't, you know, if you're just trying, say, okay, I'm going to pretend I'm going to be this way for a while and see how she responds. That's not it. You're pretending. You have to really do it. A person knows when they're being gamed and when it's genuine. It has to be genuine. And the first time, if she wants you to wear suits or dress a different way or comb your hair or something, and you do that, and she's thinking, well, he's just doing that for some reason. He wants something, so he's just trying to butter me up. He wants something. So she may ask you to wear a suit every day. She may ask you to, you know, walk around on your tiptoes, whatever, just to see if you'll do it. But if she gets the point, you know, because she has to be convinced, because you've been, no, these are my stuff, you know, I don't want to do it that way. Once you get her actually convinced where she believes you that you just love her and are going to do whatever, you know, trying to make her happy, then things will change. But don't expect them to change the first day or even the first month. You may have to be committed to this. And it's possible that you will commit to it and she won't change. She'll just take advantage of you. Well, what do you do then? You go off and you find something better, right? You find a different relationship, you know, but it's one of these things. We have a strategy that we play all the time. It's called, I can't lose if I don't play. That's our strategy. Everything we have this fear that something will happen we don't like. And the way we deal with the fear is we say, well, I won't play, and that can't happen. The fear can't get me if I don't play. So, but guess what else happens if you don't play? You can't win. You can't even get in the game. All you can do is sit on the sidelines and feel sorry for yourself if you don't play. You see? So get out there in life. I don't know that you'll necessarily win, but go play. And if it doesn't work out, well, go find another game or another playmate, you know, until it does play. Now your probability of winning a really good relationship based on love's gone way up. If you're just going to stay in a safe place where you're both trying to manipulate each other to meet your needs, that's always going to be an unhappy situation. It's always going to be less than what you both dream of. So better to get in and play the game and have at least a chance to win. Sooner or later, you will win. It's that other thing. You find it's a paper tiger. When you get out there and actually are that way, suddenly winning becomes easy. And you were thinking it was so hard. It's just like the paper tiger. Oh, that fear wasn't really there. Well, you find out it's really easy to win, and you're not going to be abused. And, it's all that's your fear. So if you can just beat your fear down to the point that you can love and you can give unconditionally. No, you don't have to, you don't have to do the things you want. I'm just going to please you. You do whatever you want to do. I'm pleasing you. You please yourself. Right. And just do that. If you can get over the fear of doing that, you'll find it's just like the paper tiger that you get over these other fears. All the awful things that you imagine is going to happen to you disappear and go up in smoke, and they don't happen at all. As a matter of fact, there's a very high probability that your whole relationship will start to get much, much better. And if it doesn't, it's not a good relationship for you to be in, you see?
Yeah.
If love doesn't work, it's not a good relationship to be in.
Totally.
So you win, it's a win-win. Whatever it is you do, however it comes out, it's a win for you. So why not play? Why stay on the sidelines afraid to play?
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a pretty intense conversation. Yeah.
I only have intense conversations. You see.
Yeah, man. I've never been the one for small talk, man. Like, I just want to get to the real shit. Like, I just want to get. That's the way I've always been, anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's because you're driven. You know that there's an answer someplace. You just feel it in your bones that there are answers. There is a way to look at the problem where it'll make sense. And you're just banging your head up against that wall because it doesn't make sense. But I know there's a way. If you just look at this problem perspective, it'll make sense and you can figure this out. And that's why you are doing that. You're driven to find out. All those kind of people, seekers, right? They're seeking something, even if they're not sure exactly what they're seeking. They're driven to seek it anyway, and that's good. That means you have an inner awareness. There's something more, that you have it all. There's stuff yet you need to find out and learn and grow, and that inner awareness is what is pushing you to grow up. All consciousness has that. Everybody has that inner awareness that's nudging them to grow up. See a bigger picture, find out. But a lot of us, our fear pushes that awareness down under the rug. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to do that. Okay, this relationship I got with my girl, it's good enough. We get by, we're friends. So rather than grow up, they kind of try to get by, and get by isn't enough. You have to grow. But you don't have to change anything major in your life to do that, is the point. Like, you have to throw away the old life and start on a new one. You just have to throw away the old self with its big ego and fear and start building a new self. All the rest of the world can stay the way it is, you see. You don't need anything else out there to change. You don't need to go sit in a cave and cross your legs and, meditate. You don't need to do any of that stuff. All you need to do is fix yourself. Get rid of the fear, become love, and the rest of your world will fall out however it falls out. And if you stay true to that, you'll find that it'll fall out really wonderfully.